Hey there YouTube, welcome to Big Mike Beard Wisdom. So, I want to talk a little bit about the Escalade and the issues I've been having with it. And it's pretty simple and it applies to quite a few GM vehicles. And that's when you have a check engine light on, your remote start doesn't work. So right now, it works fine. The issue I was having was a P0172 and a P0175. Fuel system too rich for both Bank 1 and Bank 2. That's both those codes. And if you've got a GM vehicle and your remote start doesn't work, a lot of times because your check engine light's on. Sometimes because your hood's open or some other feature. So like the remote start won't work on this if like the rear hatch is loose or ajar. And up here in Minnesota, man, you really start to rely on your remote start just because it is so cold up here sometimes. So the GM remote start works pretty simple, and you get two remote starts. Both of them last about 10 minutes. So because they last about 10 minutes, you know, most vehicles will get fairly toasty if you run both of them. They may get just a little bit toasty if you run just one of them, depending on the outside temperatures. And then the GM ones are smart enough that they kind of figure out, hey, it's cold outside, I'm going to run the heat. Or, hey, it's hot outside, I'm going to run the AC. So it's pretty handy in the summertime too. So as you can see, my daughter's snoozing away. And it's been one of those situations where over time, you know, I haven't had much time to fix things. And even before she was born, it was like, oh boy, we got to try and get these projects done and do this stuff and that stuff. And then try and save up money. And either way, I wasn't able to fix the Escalade right away. And we went for longer than I would have liked with the check engine light on, including pretty much all of last winter. Now, I kind of got around the check engine lights with just a simple code reader. So if you pick up just a simple code reader, you can have it clear the codes, and then your remote start will work, at least until the ECU runs the tests and stuff like that that trigger the code. So I could get one remote start, maybe, but sometimes it was so bad that it would just stutter and stall. But man, was it a pain in the butt, because I had to remember, you know, pretty much when I parked it to go ahead and clear the codes. That way I'd have remote start in the morning. So depending on what your codes are for, it could be for a whole bunch of different things. But again, if you have a check engine light on, your remote start's not going to work. For me, the issue was that I had broken bolts in the manifold on both sides. Plus, my fuel alcohol content was really high. So on this particular vehicle, to get the flex fuel stuff to read, for some reason GM, instead of installing an inline sensor like are on some GM vehicles, they actually do everything through the oxygen sensors. And being that there's 230,000 miles on the vehicle, I was willing to bet that the oxygen sensors were pretty wore out, or at least not reading quite right. I was able to get these kind of like cheater brackets installed. So both on the front here and on the rear on this side, and then purely on the rear on this side, to kind of semi-shore up the exhaust manifold and help rule out maybe some issues with oxygen either sneaking in between pulses, or some of the exhaust getting blown out. That likewise can cause kind of weird issues and stuff. So that was the first repair. The second repair was to replace all 4 oxygen sensors. They're not that bad. Way easier than these brackets were. And the reason why I went with the brackets is because winter's coming pretty quick, and as rusty as things get up here in Minnesota, a simple project like doing these exhaust manifolds can quickly turn into a really big project as other things snap, round off, you know, weird stuff happens. So avoiding the weird stuff, I put those brackets in. Would I recommend it? Meh. I do believe they worked, but you know, it's one of those situations where the front one's here, so if you'd install one there and you install one here in the front, it's not going to be that bad. The ones in the back, kind of a pain in the butt. So even though this rear one is the same as that one, on at least my vehicle, there's significantly less room in that back section than there is in the front. So because it's so tight down there, it's a bit of a pain in the butt. And then once I had that installed, I was able to run through some of the tests, and now the check engine light's out. The fuel content's running where the fuel content's supposed to be now. And we're pretty good as far as like the air fuel ratios go. So I'm pretty happy with this. I'm definitely thinking once it gets warmer, it's going to be a bear to remove those brackets because it was tough putting them in. But I probably should just go ahead and replace the whole manifold assembly. That way everything's all known good. Plus it'll be a great time to do the motor mounts because they're just right down there. And it'll make things easier as far as that goes. So the check engine light also could have been caused by, say, the mass airflow sensor here. So if the mass airflow sensor was dirty and not reading quite right, that could also attribute to why both banks were reading rich. So depending on your check engine light, you're going to have definite work to do in order to make sure that your remote start works through the wintertime. Now, there is one kind of funny one, though, that once it gets cold enough, you don't have to worry about that code coming back on for quite a while. And that's your EVAP codes. So let's say you've got a small leak, large leak, just a code in general for the EVAP system not working properly. The EVAP system only runs when it's above a certain temperature. So up here in Minnesota, where it gets really, really, really cold and stays cold for months on end, there's a good chance your EVAP system won't run for months. So if you've got a check engine light and you're like, man, I got to keep clearing this thing every night in order to get it to actually remote start, and then it gets cold enough and all of a sudden you're like, hey, my check engine light hasn't come back. It might be an EVAP code. But on the other side of that, you know, it might be one of those things where you might have an issue with your EVAP system as soon as it gets cold. Maybe a line dry rots or something like that. And then come springtime, now you got codes all the time. But the nice thing is that every code has its own like qualifying situations. So it's got to meet this kind of criteria given this set of parameters. So as long as it's too cold, the EVAP stuff's not going to run. Which, you know, can be a curse on itself because your EVAP system is one of those situations where if you're ever filling it up and the fuel pump's running, then shuts off after a little bit, and you're like, well, that was weird, and then you squeeze it again, it runs for a little bit, then shuts off. That means that your vent valve isn't opening and allowing the excess air in the tank to vent out, so it builds up pressure and trips the fuel nozzle. So with winter coming, you know, if you're thinking about using the remote start, I highly recommend getting your vehicle checked out just to make sure that that check engine light isn't something really simple that, hey, here's all you got to do and you can be able to knock it out yourself, save a little bit of money. Or if you're better off buying a little code reader just to make sure you're able to have remote start every morning. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to like, subscribe, and I'll check you next time. Of course, that being said, I'm not 100% sure how hard it'd be to install like an aftermarket remote start, and if the aftermarket remote start is not going to care that the check engine light's on.